It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. July 4th, Independence Day celebrations are underway. It's a weekend heavily adorned by national symbols of the U.S. flag everywhere and all kinds of other nationalistic paraphernalia. It is a good time to analyze these altruistic national symbols, how they evolved. Should we be pledging allegiance to them? Joining us now from Houston, Texas, to analyze all of this and the historical significance of it all is Dr. Gerald Horne. Gerald Horne holds the John J. and Rebecca Morse Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gerald.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's first talk about the flag and this allegiance to the flag that we are required to pledge in every public school. What does it mean? Where does it come from?
Well, it's very interesting. The Pledge of Allegiance actually comes into play in the late 19th century. It was devised in no small measure because the United States had only recently fought a bitter civil war where upwards of 700,000 people were slaughtered on battlefields and in their houses. And it was thought that this artificially constructed former slaveholders' republic needed some kind of glue to help to bring disparate elements together. And voila, you have the Pledge of Allegiance, which is actually not formally adopted until about 1942, when the United States once again was challenged by war, this time by World War II in the battle against Berlin and Japan. And once again, the issue of national unity was at play, not least because a substantial percentage of the citizenry, particularly those of African descent, were subjected to routine atrocities, and it was felt that they would not necessarily be enthusiastic about shedding their blood and making the ultimate sacrifice for this so-called republic. And so therefore you had the mandatory installation of the Pledge of Allegiance, particularly in schools, because it was thought that you had to get U.S. nationals at an early age in order to inculcate in them some sort of identification with the United States of America.
And in terms of African American history that you referred to here, where is there signs of resistance to this?
Well, you should look at the third stanza of the Star-Spangled Banner, which is sung routinely, as you know, in sporting events, at every major, perhaps even minor event in this country. The third stanza, the lyrics devised by Francis Scott Key of Maryland, who, by the way, was a slave owner, and by the way, in 1835 helped to incite a pogrom against people of African descent, particularly slaves, in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. In the third stanza, he denounces the black population of the United States. And one of the reasons he denounces them is because the Star-Spangled Banner comes out of the War of 1812, when there was this conflict between Britain, the former colonial power, and the United States of America, which had seceded from the British Empire in 1776. Voila, the July 4th holiday. And the African population, by several orders of magnitude, not only fought against the secession in 1776, but they aligned with London. And when the Redcoats invaded, particularly Washington, D.C., Maryland area in August 1814, and they set Washington, D.C. afire, set the White House afire, sent President James Madison and his garrulous spouse Dolly fleeing into the streets, one step ahead of the posse. And the Star-Spangled Banner speaks specifically and particularly to that, reprimanding, reproving, and denouncing black people for not standing alongside the Star-Spangled Banner, not standing alongside the United States of America, but instead aligning, as the black population tended to do, with the real and imagined enemies of the United States of America.
Gerald, today we were asked to dress our preschool children in red, white, and blue for their July 4th parade that was taking place at school. Now, some of the parents raised our eyebrows and resisted, and we, of course, didn't dress the kids in these colors. How do people, ordinary people, start to resist this kind of nationalistic indoctrination from the very early onset at school?
Well, I salute the parents at your children's school, including yourself, for engaging in your own form of resistance. Obviously, that kind of resistance needs to be duplicated and magnified from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I think that that, in fact, has been happening. And you need to realize, once again, that one of the reasons why there is this resolute insistence upon the Pledge of Allegiance and the red, white, and blue and saluting the flag is because this is a jerry-rigged republic. That is to say, it's an artificially constructed republic. There is a denial of the reality that this so-called republic was based primarily upon enslaving black people, enslaving people of African descent. And rather than acknowledge that brutal and bitter reality and its complement, which was expropriation of the land and property of Native Americans, we get this happy talk and we get this insistence upon saluting the flag and singing the Star-Spangled Banner, but that only helps to generate an ever more deeper resistance.
All right, Gerald, I thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to share this with everyone this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.